Welcome to the Enter the Stuniverse podcast. Um, it is January 14th, and I kind of wonder how much of this is just an experiment or a practice, so to speak, of just really keeping myself in check with accountability and follow through and resolve, because the thing with being consistent with this is now that I have these sort of means to start kind of second guessing things, the way it's perceived. I've made the comment several times about just coming across as a complete D-bag for it, but I think that that is probably rooted in some type of imposter syndrome or fear, and fear is one of those things that I've kind of been thinking about at great length lately. I know in terms of podcasts that I consume, I've been listening to a ton of interviews with creative types lately, because I think that oftentimes for me as a consumer, when life or something doesn't make sense, so to speak, I start listening to the perspectives of others, because oftentimes somebody out there who is more intelligent than myself will end up saying something that strikes me right at the right time. So I know the Devin Townsend podcast episode with Steve Vai was insane. It's like a 3-hour podcast that it could have easily went on for 6 or 7, and I would have been on for the entire way. Steve's point of view is really interesting and great, and it's hearing people like that talk about how much fear sort of holds them back because they're afraid that people are going to know that they're full of shit. When it's somebody like Steve Vai saying that, that's kind of crazy. And when you think about it, we're all more or less the same. Clearly, in terms of technical ability or talent, it's varying degrees, but across the board, we all sort of suffer with the same things. And I think that fear is such a toxic thing that we all deal with, that keeps us from really being our true selves in form in a lot of ways. So how do I do this without being afraid of the way I come across? It's not to say that not giving a fuck is the correct term, but I think that sometimes compulsion, or what I'm compelled to do, rather, outweighs any of the potential consequences. And being sort of hyper focused on the creative side of things, which if you're not sort of into that, all life is creating, in a sense, whether you're cooking or your even finances. When you think about it, what you're doing is creating sort of financial stability for others. And not to mention the fact that reality and what we perceive is all us sending electrons to neural pathways or whatever scientific sort of jargon you want to spin on that. But it's all within the mind, and I think I'm confused by the mind a lot, or fascinated by it. And especially in today's world, and that's not said in the sense of things are any better or worse, but each point in time that we're all alive is a new point in time that hasn't really been experienced before, especially with technology. It's weird how everything that ever was and everything that is present and even certain aspect of future things are right there in our pockets now. And I know the cases of ADHD and all these diagnoses of sort of isms, things wrong mentally with people is kind of on the rise. And I do kind of wonder how much of that is a side effect of us being new to cell phones and everything being right there. I mean, with all of existence being right there at the palm of your hand, how can you not be some degree of ADHD at this point in time? I think the main thing is to sort of limit, not necessarily your time, because I know a lot of people use that as like their decompression sort of relaxing type thing, but be mindful of what it is that you're consuming with your phone. Be a little more selective about what you choose to do with it. And that seems to be helping me somewhat. And also just to remember to take a deep breath and sort of recenter yourself in the moment at hand. It's so easy to be taken out of where we are with everything going on these days that I wonder how much of us are really participating in life. I know I tend to mentally check out a lot, and then I have to bring myself back and remind myself to just exist in that moment as opposed to being somewhere else. And I wonder how much art is rooted in kind of purging the brain of all these things that sort of take you out of the moment. Especially when there's things that subconsciously sort of come to light through having an idea. I wonder how much of it is clearing things that we're afraid to face within ourselves. I know that working on things now, a point of this podcast was to sort of be a production diary to hold myself accountable to actually make music. And I put some stuff out on streaming, the one that I finished kind of as a challenge to myself to finish something, and one that I'd done a couple of years back. Those are on Spotify and iTunes and wherever else music is played. But after that, I remember the moment that I posted the one, I instantly went back to an idea that had come to me oddly is like a premonition, so to speak. It was the precursor to a bit of a rough time, and it flowed very naturally. I didn't really have to fight to write that one, and it just sort of came out, and I did a sort of demo of it about a year ago, and I revisited that, finally gave it an ending, and started retracking everything and adding layers and mixing. And it almost feels like the ideas that come to us at certain points and times in our lives end up being soundtracks to them, and maybe my desire to finish them is laying certain events or things that I've been struggling with to rest, I guess. And it's really funny because this one is rather different in the way that it came out. J.G. Thirlwell, from the various incarnations of Fetus, he did the music for Venture Brothers. I was listening to a podcast with him, and he, especially in the 80s, was performing everything on his albums, and he said early on that while tracking, the way stuff would be tracked, he would have a clear idea in his head, but when it started coming out, it would turn into something different, which has happened to me as well. But this one kind of came out exactly the way I thought it would, which makes it a bit of an oddity. So that one's maybe 80% done, and trying to give that context of, because the base of it was written like a year ago, it's, do I release it standalone, or do I work it into a bigger picture type thing? I know a lot of these ideas that I've sort of had over the years, and some recently, it's almost like the pieces to a puzzle to try and get them to fit. And working on these several at tandem, actually, it hasn't quite presented itself to me what it's meant to be quite yet. I'm just kind of following bits and pieces here and there. And I do think that artistic ideas of any way, shape, or form have very little to do with us in terms of what they form into. We have these ideas that I think strike us as interesting because of where we're at mentally, and that's why we choose to facilitate them. But what they end up becoming, I think, is really dependent on the ideas themselves. I know I finished tracking that one mostly, minus some bits and pieces there, and adding layers and sort of experimenting and mixing that. I went straight into another idea that I kind of started a while back. It's an idea that I've had for a while, and I tracked the initial song idea. That this one I'm actually starting to play drums on as opposed to program. I have an Alesis Nitro mesh kit that I use Superior Drummer through, so it acts as more or less a MIDI controller, and trying to get back into the swing of that, and being away from that for like 10 years, my own limitations, and how differently that idea is becoming. Just playing versus programming is odd. Just the feel of it is different. And I know that the one song that I've not quite named yet is very loud, very kind of going full force for the entirety of it. And I'd worked on that for like several days obsessively, and like hearing it, and I went to start tracking the other one, which has a sort of heavier intro as well. It's very loud. And once I got done with that part, moving forward with the writing, it took a very weird turn. I decided to try and write the next section with bass versus guitar, which turned into this shift from this sort of crappy Devin Townsend ripoff thing that I tend to do a lot, into this sort of funky alternative type thing. And naturally, the way it's all kind of coming together with that one is I tracked the bass and then the drums and then redid the bass. And when I went to add guitar, the idea that I had for the very last section has changed my idea for the drums. So really, as these ideas sort of come together in the way that I'm going about it, it is still evolving into something new. And that's why I really think that these ideas have more to do with where they go than we do, so to speak. And I have another couple of other ideas that are increasingly sort of all over the place. And I wonder how much of that is a reflection of my mental state, because I've been feeling extremely overwhelmed for quite some time. And I wonder if these sort of shifts, tonally speaking, are a reflection of that. And trying to give them room to breathe instead of just like forcing my way through them, because I think I realized that I have very little to no ability in any area of life, really. I've just kind of blown through with brute force, and that mixed with being in restaurants for 12 years now, and that being such a fast-paced industry to where you feel this pressure to sort of hurry, has made me sort of hyper aware of how in a hurry I think most people live their lives. It's like you go to the grocery store and everybody's just frantically shopping and kind of frantically doing everything, and you hear more cars honking because everybody's just like in a hurry. And I think that like just really stopping, breathing, and realizing that that particular moment is all that you have control over is something to practice don't take anything I rant about as gospel. This is just sort of hypothesis to try and make this all make sense. But I think slowing down and just existing would do everybody some degree of good. Because the only thing you have control over is right now. And that's a sort of paraphrasing of what Steve I actually said, but it really sort of struck me that all your power is right now. So what do we do with it? I think that me following my own sort of compulsion is some sort of, I really don't want to use the word like higher calling because I don't think it's that, but our own intuition to lead us to the next step in our life. And I don't mean probably, or who knows what's really going to happen with this, but I wonder if the end result of this is going to be this, you know? I wonder how much things just act as stepping stones to the next phase, and maybe all of this that I've been doing recently sort of creatively is some sort of transition into something else, but I'm just kind of following it and seeing where it goes. And I think whatever instincts that you have at this point in time telling you to do something, you should probably follow it. The sort of intrusive thoughts side of things aside, like I know that a lot of people, it's like you'll be driving over a bridge and kind of think it's like, oh, I should just, swerve. Maybe not like that, but whatever sort of goal that you have that keeps coming back in your mind, pursue that and see where it takes you. And it's probably not gonna be where you think it's gonna end up, but that's kind of part of the ride. I think that where we end up doesn't matter. Like, I know that everybody has this concept of succeeding at things, but what does that really look like? What is success? Because I don't think anybody ever really fully achieves that. Because once you get to a certain point, the point that you thought you would be satisfied at, I think you'll find that there's a new set of problems and things to deal with. Like, you sit there, and this is a quote from The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, but you think you need more money, so you get the promotion at work, so you start working more hours, and then you're tired, so you need a vacation. And you go on vacation, and while you're on vacation, you think to yourself, I need a drink. So you get a drink, and then that makes you want a second drink. And then next thing you know, you wake up and you're hungover, which leads to another set of problems. And I wonder how much we lack the ability to be 100% satisfied. And I think that living in a society where we primarily don't have to worry about where our next meal is coming from, or, you know, having a safe place to eat, how much of this is sort of self imposed to keep our brains entertained? Because I think it may be some sort of evolutionary sort of defense mechanism to create these problems to constantly solve, so we still have that muscle within ourselves of the ability to survive. And I wonder if most of our motivations are that is just our brains trying to keep that aspect of itself in check. So if something were to happen that would sort of jeopardize our existence, it would still have the ability to function. Because I just feel like existing and just being is probably more beneficial at this point in time than this pressure that we feel to be happy. And I'm not saying like that sounds more bleak than it's meant to be, but I think just enjoying the ride in the sort of Bill Hicks sense is more important than wherever we end up, because I don't think we'll ever end up where we thought we would as people. Whoever invented the telephone probably didn't think that one day it would be in our pockets and full of porn. But the way life shifts and we shift with it, I don't think it's a whole lot of concern for us to put so much stock into what's going to happen next instead of just following the moment now and seeing where that takes us. And it's funny how much listening to all these brilliant creative minds, how much the creative process applies to life in general. So that's kind of my rant of the week, and trying to sort of make sense of things. But anyway, if you've made it this far, remember to drink lots of water, take some vitamins, and get as much sleep as you can.